Hello everyone. So welcome back to Dilip IT Academy. As part of this session, I'm going to discuss POJO class. So we should understand the importance of POJO class. What is the concept of POJO class? Why this concept being used in every application implementation or development time, especially in every aspect we will use POJO class. So what is POJO class? Why we have to use or how to implement POJO classes? What are the rules we have to follow while defining the POJO classes? We will see in this session. So here the name stands POJO, plain old Java object. So what is the concept of POJO class? Here it is. We know that the importance of the POJO class. If you are taking any real-time application with respect to Java language, and whenever we are working towards any framework, for example Spring and as well as Spring Boot and even Hibernate, JPA, whatever you can take, right? So whatever you can take with respect to Java language internally or directly we are going to use POJO classes in our application development. So that means we should know must and should about POJO class information if you want to work with any real-time applications. Okay, so the importance of POJO class here it is. Simply what it is saying, class should be simple and plain. That is what the concept of it is. So what is the meaning of should be simple and plain? Here it is. Generally, for example, assume like this. In a real-time application or any web application point of view, a data coming from front end to the back end application. Now what will happen? The data, whatever coming from the front end point of view as a request. So in this case, the data coming from the front end and data came as a request object. Now in this case, whenever the data coming from the client, the data should be holded as a Java object. And at the same time, what we will do is generally in our web applications, we will maintain multiple layers to deal with the data in different business logics point of view. For example, MVC architecture. In MVC, we know that, right? So different layers will be involved as part of the web application. Now again, this same Java object, I have to transfer to the another layer. And from there, again, maybe I will do some manipulation or whatever it is. Again, I will create or maybe same object. I will forward from there to some other layer. Now finally, I will forward the data to the database level, something like that, right? So this is what we are doing. So that means data transmitting from one layer to another layer. The data coming from the front end or client is transmitted within the Java application of backend from one layer to another layer. In which format? Object format. What you are transmitting? Data. For example, assume the the front end point of view, name, email, salary, gender, like that, etc., etc. A lot of data is coming. So that data is converted finally into a Java object, and that object being transmitted from one layer to another layer somehow to do the database operations and whatever it is, fetching operations, delete operations, update operations. Similarly, whenever we are reading data from the DB also, what will happen, guys? So whenever you are querying the data from the database, you will get some records, and those records should be converted to Java objects. And those Java objects again transmitted in between these layers, and finally will forward the data back to the client also, right? As a response, you will forward the data. So here, with respect to our backend Java point of view, Java application point of view, in this overall scenario, if you observe here, in every scenario, we are going to deal with objects. That too, objects with the data, objects with the data. So that means every framework is also, generally we will use frameworks as part of our real-time applications, right? So internally, the frameworks are more and more are creating Java objects every time by providing the abstraction, by following the abstraction. What they will do, every framework is making this conversion of objects or transmitting objects from one layer to another layer, many times automated in the sense those frameworks are internally implemented and they are saying it as automated behavior. So that means internally frameworks will use object creation process binding the data with the data, binding the data to achieve the encapsulation point of view, as well as by following the abstraction principle. Internally they are making all this process automated. That means they implemented internally. Many of the frameworks will use reflection API internally to create an object for a Java class. Now in this case, the objects, whatever we are taking, especially with respect to data transmitting from one place to another place point of view, people will use always a concept called as POJO classes. That means plain old Java object. So what this concept is suggesting here, it is a class should be very simple and it should be very plain. So that means there are some rules we have to follow to define the POJO class. So the And the POJO class advantages here it is simplicity, and second one is flexibility, third one is readability, and fourth one is reusability. By using POJO class, we can achieve these four functionalities. So that means the POJO class will represent simplicity as well as flexibility and readability and reusability. So we will see what and all. Now there are some rules available as part of the POJO class. So what are those rules is to define a POJO class. That means we know how to define the Java classes, but to define a POJO class, to reach the specifications of a POJO class, we have to follow some rules. What are those rules is, first rule number one, class should not extend any other class. So that means if you call a class as a POJO class, rule number one, should not extend any other predefined classes. So that means we should not take any predefined classes. Point number one. And point number two, the POJO classes are saying here it is class should not implement predefined interfaces also. So that means we should not extend or we should not implement any predefined classes or interfaces. Those are the rules we have to follow. And the third rule is class should contain a default constructor. So what is the point here it is? If you want to call a class as a POJO class means that class must and should contain a default constructor. Why it should contain a default constructor is right now I told you, right? Frameworks internally taking care of the object creation in between one layers to another layers point of your different approaches with respect to ORM frameworks or whatever it is, right? They will use internally reflection API. So by using reflection API, they will create an object for a class. Internally at runtime level for a class, they will create an object. They will create an object. But to create object, you know that, right? For example, whenever I want to create a default object, that means object with default values, then definitely a constructor should be presented. Which constructor? Default constructor, zero parameters constructor, right? So these rules we know that even then only we can able to create the object. If you don't have a default constructor, that means assume you have a constructor with arguments, argument constructor, and you don't have any default constructor, arguments constructor. So no default constructor. In this case, what will happen, guys? As a developer point of view, if you are thinking, if you don't have a no default constructor, right? So in this case, what will happen in this use case? Yes, we can create an object for a class, but by passing always argument values. That means you have to execute always a arguments constructor. That means by passing argument values, we can create an object. So that is what the fundamental you have to follow. But if you want to create an object with the default values of variables, is it possible? No, right? Because there is no zero parameterized constructor. So that's why you cannot create an object. To avoid this kind of problems, the POJO class is saying an object creation process should be very simple. It should looks like very plain. The process should be very plain. So that's why you have to maintain always a default constructor. But maintaining an argument constructor is up to our choice. Depends on requirement. We may maintain argument constructor. That's up to choice. It depends on the requirement point of view. But default constructor is mandatory. But default constructor is mandatory. So these are all rules you have to remember. So that means once you define a class, for you have to make sure a default constructor is presented, and generally POJO class is following by making a concept called as by following a principle called as encapsulation. To achieve the encapsulation like data binding, right? So with the concept of encapsulation, generally we will derive the POJO classes. So that means generally what we will do is variables in class, generally what we will do is variables we will declare or we will define always as private, always as a private. So we will define always variables as a private, and then we will define, there is a concept available called as setter comma getter methods. So what is that? Setter, as well as we have a concept called as getter methods. So we should know what is setter method, what is getter method here. This is the terminology generally every developer or every person will use, setter method versus getter methods. What is the concept of setter method and getter method here? Let's understand. For example, now here I told you one point, variables are private. Now assume I have a class like this, class A, and I define a variable called as something like integer A and integer B, something like that. Now these variables as part of my POJO class, I told you like private, right? Maybe we have to define this kind of. Now whenever I made private variables, and with respect to a class, if I would like to set some values to the variables, a value as 10, b value as 20 in the from some other class, from different class, generally what we will do, we can create the object. Okay, because of the default constructor, you will create an object equal to new, yeah, object. You have created an object. But if you want to set values a comma a value as 10, a equal to 10 and b equal to some value like 20, you have to set these values. Is it possible? No, because you have only variables, you don't have any other things to set values into a comma b. So that means you cannot set. Why? Because private variables, private properties we cannot access outside of the class. So that means you cannot access. Then what you have to do, you cannot set the values for a for the variables. Then in such case, what encapsulation is suggesting here, it is, instead of providing access directly to the variables from different classes or outside of the class, we have to make sure private and make sure those variables data being accessed as well as updating is from the different approaches by following setter and getter method. So that means now in this case, the setter methods concept, setter method means, setter method is nothing but, setter is here it is in the sense setting a value. That is what the meaning of setter. Setter means setting a value. How? By using a method. So that's why it is called a setter method. Here in this case, the setter methods will follow always some kind of syntax, global syntax. Generally, people will follow same syntax everywhere. However, it is, what you have to do is make sure public access specifier. Why? Because that is what the concept, right? If variable itself public, then you can directly set values by accessing variables. But here the problem here it is, variables are private due to some reason, encapsulation point of view or whatever it is, we are restricting variables access outside of the class. That's why you made it as private. So that's why setter methods should be public. Why? Because so that I can access this method from outside of the classes, from different classes. Okay, and followed by its return type should be always void, because when you are updating value of an object, value of a variable for an object, you have to update it and you don't need to return anything. So that's why setter methods will have a syntax called as void, and then followed by a word called as set word. See guys, that's why it is called as setter method. And then setter, and immediately you have to concatenate the variable name. Immediately you have to concatenate the variable name. For example, here what is the variable name? A, right? So you have to follow, you know that, right? Method names will follow always camel case, right? So when first word will be in the lowercase, second word onwards, it should be in the capital. Now here I have single A, right? I'll convert it as a capital A, but I will take different variables now for an example. Now this is what you have to follow, and followed by the parenthesis, and in this parenthesis you have to define same type of method argument one more time. Same type of method argument one more time. So what is the variable data type? Integer, right? So that's why now I taken same argument type and I can define some variable name here, or you can define a local variable point of view also. And then the body will contain always like this. What is that body? Here it is, assume ended. So here the setter method body will coming as this dot a equal to a. So what is the point of this means here? Current class object variable, current object variable. So that means simply this a, guys, this a representing this a, this a representing this a, local one. So when you referred with this coming, it's nothing but current instance. That means instance variable point of it is pointing to the instance variable. So this approach people will follow to define a setter method. So what is happening as part of this setter method now? Understand. Now assume this method is defined inside the class called as a. Now what will happen once you created an object? So what you will do, object name dot and followed by method, that means set a. Why? That means you are setting a value. So what is the value means? It's up to whatever your requirement. For example 10 you are passing, that's all, semicolon. Now what will happen? Yes, yours in this case the 10 value being processed to here, and the 10 is assigned back to this instance variable called as a. So that means now what is happens in the object, in the JVM memory point of view, this is what the things happen now. Earlier a equal to 0, b equal to 0 because integer and instance variables, right? Default values are 0, 0. Now in this case, your a value became 10. A value is overridden with 10. Similarly, you have to define one more setter method for the b variable also. So how to write down, see here now, it should be always public and then void, because once you are setting a value, you should not return any value, and then followed by set is the word you have to use, and variable name, make sure camel case format, and then take same type of method argument. So here b belongs to the integer, so that's why I take an integer, and generally we can use same variable name or you can use different variable name also, no problem. Only thing is here you have to define logic, right? So this dot b equal to x. So now what happened? Now if you want to set a value, what you will do again? Object dot set. You are calling this simple method now, passing a value called as 20. Now what will happen with this method, like this line execution? Yes, your b value will be overridden with this set 20, because here 20 comes and the 20 is assigned back to the instance variable called as b. So that's why your value became 20. So that means now setter methods is all about setting a value of a variable. Now similarly, the opposite activity called as getter methods. It's completely opposite action. Opposite means as of now we set the values. Now it's all about reading the value, reading value or getting value. So that means now requirement is in different classes, I want to see what is the a value, what is the b value. Now in the different class point of view, I want to see what is the a value, what is the b value in the object. Is it possible by using object? No, because private variables you cannot access. Then what you have to do is, then POJO class point of view, we are going to define getter methods. So what is the syntax to be followed here? It is, just understand. Now this method also should be public. This method also should be public. And generally setter method point of view, you take in void. Why? Because you are updating a value in the object level. You are not expecting back anything, but in this case reading in the sense, getting in the sense, expecting back, that means a return value. So what return value? Now for example, how many variables I have? Two variables I have, a comma b. So a data type is integer. So if I want to see what is the value of a, that means the data type is what, guys? Integer. So you have to take data type of the variable, in this case what? Int. Now you have to use a word called as get, and then followed by the variable name you have to use immediately, variable name get a. And here are you going to take any method argument? If you apply our common sense, no, because it's all about reading the value what is available right now in the object level, right? So no need to pass any value, simply my intention here, it is getting a value. So no need to pass any input value. So that means body comes like this. Now getter method point of view, what is that body means? Return this dot a. So why? Because you are returning a value from the current object, this means current object, right? So then whenever you are calling get a method, automatically it will go to that current object and it will return the a value, based on this. So that means now if you are calling again in the different class level, like object dot get a, that's all. Simply it will return always what? Integer value, integer a equal to something like that. See, now finally you got integer a value into different class. But how you got? Via getter method point of view. So this is the approach you have to follow, the getter method syntaxes. Here it is. For example, I taken only a comma b, right? Let's take some variable names like this current year, and then followed by order number, order number, and then followed by employee id, some variable names. Now how to define setter getter methods? Understand, guys. So current year resume I taken as integer, and order number I taken again as long, and employee id I taken as string, because okay, like that. Now define setter getter methods for this variables as a practice point of view. For example, if you want to write down a setter syntax, what you have to do? Public, then void, void you have to use always, because no return value, and then set is the word, and you have to use the variable name as it is. What is the variable name here? Current year. But camel case format you have to follow. Variable name starting with, here it is all about lowercase because camel case, but by the time already set is there, right? So that's why what you have to do is you have to copy paste this word, but make sure first character is uppercase. So that means current year, like that. This is what you have to write down the method name. And what about the method argument? Yes, I told you already, same data type method argument you have to take. And let's take like this current, yeah, let's take like this current year, right? Open the block, code block, and then followed by close, and inside this dot, the current variable name, I mean instance variable name is current year equal to current. So that is how we have to write down the setter method for any variables. Even for this also you have to follow same approach. Now in case if you want to write down the getter method, same syntax you have to follow every time. What it is? Method should be public and then followed by void or return type. Yes, return type, because we are reading the value. And what is the return type I have to take? Integer. If it is string, then public. Then if it is, for example, getter, for this public, I need to take string data type and followed by get employee ID. I attached a word called as get followed by the variable name. And in this case, any method argument? No, because we are not passing any input value. We are simply reading. And that too, what's happening in this case? You are reading. And what? This variable value, right? So that's why this dot, what is that variable name? Employee ID. Like that, you have to write down the getter methods for different variables. Similarly, here also, let me complete for this also immediately. See here, return type I have to take what? Integer. And for which variable? Get which variable? Current year. Current year. And followed by any return type, sorry, any method argument? No, because we are not setting any value. We are just reading. And then what you will do? Return this dot current year. Like this, you have to make sure writing setter getter methods for a variable. So this is how you have to know the setter getter methods definition for a variables point of view. Based on the data types, you have to follow always this kind of syntaxes. So now understand what is a POJO class. Define a POJO class. How to define a POJO class? Let's see here by following each and every rule. Here it is. Now let's create a Java project. POJO class. New class. I'm taking class name as, for example, I'm taking class name as order details. What is my class name? Order details. And I'm defining this class as a POJO class. What is this class? POJO class. So in this case, generally people will, POJO class is saying like you don't take any other predefined classes or interfaces, something like that. It should be very plain. That's what the meaning it is. Now, what? Based on my requirement, assume I have some properties like order ID, and followed by order price and order customer name, price order. So whatever it is, number of items in the order, like that, assume I have multiple properties as part of this class. Now let's define a property POJO class point of view. What you have to do first, 4 variables I need, right? 4 values. That's why based on the requirement, integer ID and then double price and then followed by customer name. I will take like string customer name, and then I will follow number of items, means again integer number of items. Like that I take it. So is this following variables point of view POJO class? No. POJO class properties? No, because we have to make sure as per POJO class private variables, because we should not allow accessing variables directly in this case. So like every variable as a private. This is what you have to do. But whenever we made variables private, again from outside of the class, anyone created object for this, if you want to set values for the 4 properties, it's a private, you cannot access it. That's why what you have to do, guys, you have to make sure always providing the setter getter methods. See, for I'm writing for customer name point of view, first I'm writing setter of Which property, guys? Generally, in POJO class point of view, I'll tell you, we will call these things as a properties. Generally, we can call it as variable names or instance variables also. But officially, I mean professionally, people will use a word called as property. What is your property name? Property name is ID. Property name is price. So simply we will call it as a property. So that means we can use a word called as property also. So for which property I'm creating setter method now? Customer name. It belongs to which data type? String, right? And which setter method I'm passing. Setter method point of view, you have to define always void, and then set is the word you have to use. So remember, set is not a keyword. Set is just like a naming convention point of view, we are using that word. And then copy paste the variable name, but make sure first character is uppercase of the variable name. So like this camel case point of view. Now here, yes, setting the value. Setting the value means you have to pass a value, means you have to make sure always some value here it is. For example, can I take integer? There is no meaning, right? So that's why you have to make sure same data type again. So what I can do, I can take like this. But generally, you know that we can use same variable name as a local variable name as a method argument, even though you have instance variable. But to differentiate between local variable versus instance variable, we will use a keyword called as this keyword, right? So this representing current instance variable name. So this variable name equal to, if I'm using directly variable name means it's a local variable name. It's a local variable name. Yes, this is how you are writing the setter method. Now similarly getter method also, let me write in quickly. So what I will do, is it same? No, right? Getter method means you should need always a return value. That means same data type string, and you have to use a word called as get, and there will not be any input values because simply you are reading. So and return type is string means you have to take always return keyword and followed by variable name. So this is how you are going to write down the getter method, right? So now how many properties I have, guys? 4 properties, but I defined only for one property called as customer name. But what about the 3? Yes, we have to define same approach. In real-time applications, with my experience, I'm telling you, in one of the project, almost in one class, we are having 40 properties, and that class is again, I mean, derived from another user defined class only, POJO class only. So in directly or indirectly, sometimes I used to see around 100, more than 100 properties also as part of one POJO class. So that means understand the importance of POJO class. And you know, in every real-time application or wherever you go, we will create almost dozens of POJO classes in different aspects. In every real time, dozens of POJO classes. Sometimes it may be count is more than 100 also. So that means I'll tell you why and all. I'll just give you a small idea. Here it is. Now at the same time, Eclipse is provided a custom feature. Here it is, or a predefined feature to generate setter getter methods for a variables. Because assume if you are having 4, you will write down as a developer. So we know the formula, set method, get method formulas, we will write down. But if you are having 30 40 properties, then typing same thing, you are doing the same work, right? Just only thing is variable name is changing, that those are all small changes. So that's why Eclipse is giving an option. When you are using Eclipse, even IntelliJ IDEA also, you will have an option called as source option. If you see here, right click source and then go here. If you see here, what is this, guys? Generate getters and setter methods. Generate getters and setter methods for the types class. So whenever I just clicked on that, it is immediately showing out of 4 you defined already one for one property setter getter methods. Do you want to create for remaining 3 or not? If you want remaining 3, select all. If for example, depends on requirement, I'm telling you. Now you don't want everything, maybe some selected one you want, then select only those specific one. Okay, that is one scenario. And okay, I want everything. Now for example, assume there is a requirement demanding like for one of the properties only getter method required, no need of setter method, only getter method. If you want to take advantage of Eclipse editor, yes, see here, if you are extended like this extended this, what is happening? Internal it is showing again for this ID creating get ID method, set ID method, number of items, get number of setter. Now if you don't want set method means unselect it. Now in this case, what will happen, guys? For ID property, only getter method will be generated, but for this property, getter setter as well as getter setter method for these properties. So you can select, deselect based on your requirement, so that automatically Eclipse editor is going to generate the source code. That is what the concept here it is. Now see, I'm generating setter getter methods for everything. Click on generate. See, automatically the code is generated by the Eclipse by following same approach. By following the same approach, if you observe here, the same formula what we followed, Eclipse also followed same thing. Public setter method, void, same data type, this dot id, getter method. Okay, so that means you have to follow same approach. Now, can I call this class as a POJO class? Means yes, 100%. But one question here it is, this class is having default constructor. POJO class is saying we have to maintain always default constructor. Yes, this class is having a default constructor. We know that in Java, when we are not defined any constructor in a class, then internally compiler is going to take care of adding a default constructor, right? So that means indirectly this class is having a default constructor. Now, for example, sometimes I can define POJO classes with constructors also. Yes, I can define that. My requirement is sometimes demanding I need constructors also in the same POJO class. Yes, POJO class may contains argument constructors. Okay, so that means now for example, assume I want to create a constructor with these 4 parameters. One thing is I can take, or you can take help of Eclipse editor again, like however you created setter getters, right? If you see here, if you see constructor using fields, so similarly you can generate constructors also by using Eclipse. If you see here now what it is saying, a constructor is going to be created with these 4 arguments. If you want only one argument constructor ID, then deselect it. If you want only 2, select only. That means depends on your requirement, specific properties you have to choose. Now I need all 4 properties as a constructor argument. So that's why I selected 4 and click on generate. Now see here, all arguments constructor is created. All arguments constructor is created by the Eclipse editor. This is saving developer time. Now tell me, this class is a POJO class. Is it following 100% POJO class standards? Means no, because in this case, creating an object for order details is not possible, right? For example, if you see here, class main app, and let's take main method. Yeah, see here I'm creating order 1 equal to new order. So that means class name, order details. See, I cannot create an object, plain object. Plain object means without any values for the properties. I want to create a plain object. I cannot create it. That's why POJO class requires always a default constructor. Even though it is having argument constructor, we have to define always a default constructor. So that is what the meaning of POJO class here it is. Now understand what POJO class it is saying, guys. Plain old Java object. Simply consider it as a plain Java object. So the Java object should be plain. But here, if you don't have a default constructor, you are failing to create a plain object. So that's why it is saying like maintain a default constructor. Now see here, I can generate a default constructor, or I can type also. You know that, right? How to write down the constructor you can tell, or you can take help of Eclipse editor. See constructors from the superclass. In this case, 0 arguments. That means default constructor. See it, save it. Now see, the error is gone. That means now you are able to create a plain Java object. That is what the POJO class standing here it is. So now understand, I told you one point. I mean, what is the POJO class is giving us is simplicity. The classes, what we define POJO classes is simple, very simple classes. Define the properties, define setter getter methods respectively. If based on the requirement, define constructor. So this is what called as POJO class. Now, for example, assume my requirement, I have some requirement like calculate price of an order. So that means by using some number of items, I want to calculate the overall order price and all. So some logic I have to implement. So that kind of logic can I write down as part of this classes? Means no, you cannot write down. I mean, you cannot write down in the sense POJO class suggesting always as don't write any business logics, don't write any extra logic apart from this kind of structure. Only properties and its associated setter getter methods may be constructors. Apart from this logic, it is not never ever suggesting us writing any extra methods like having some business calculations or whatever it is, we are not supposed to write down that. That is what the concept here it is. So this is all called as POJO class, guys. And the second thing is flexibility. Yes. What is the flexibility here it is? Yes, you can use tomorrow wherever you want to use order details class object, you can use simply. Now, for example, assume public void print order info, something like that. And here what I can do, guys, I can take order details. So see here, now, if I created an object and I can call this method also, right? So simply main app equal to new main app and app dot print. Now what you're doing, you're passing the order one object, and order one by default contains default values, right? For example, if you see here, now see the advantage of the POJO class. Here, I want to see what are the current values available in this object. What you have to do, guys, can you call variable name? No. Here you have to use always getter method. Now I'm seeing order ID, and similarly I'm writing get customer name and get price and get number of items. Get number of items, something like that. So see here, now I'm using getter methods for reading the values. Execute it. Now what happened? All default values. Now if you want to set a value, see how simple it is now. Order one dot setting the values this time. Customer name, okay, delete. And then similarly I can set values for other properties also. Set value of ID. Order ID is assume 4 ones. Set price is all about 10,000 or something like that. Number of items, something like 5 or whatever it is. Order one dot set. See, this is what the readability, I mean flexibility we are talking. That means you're having a lot of flexibility with respect to setting the values, reading the values, like that. So you are able to set the values simply by calling the setter methods. You are able to read the values simply by using the getter methods. At the same time, you are passing that POJO class object wherever you want. Now, for example, assume you have one more method, public void send order, something like that, assume a method, and this method also taking input order details object. Next step, assume some order is in and you are sending to the next level. Okay, order details. Simply now see here, send order, and then the same Java object order details POJO class object again you are passing here. So again you can utilize that data whatever available as part of this bean object. So that means what you are doing, guys, here data is transmitted by using a simple POJO class object like this, by using simple POJO. So that is what the concept of reusability of the POJO classes. So you can reuse going further wherever you need order details object in your real-time project. Simply you can reuse that POJO class and you can create an object and you can utilize that. You can pass from one layer to another layer in whatever the requirement you are having it is. That is what called as reusability. And readability is nothing but simply, yes, it is applying the readability. How? Private property ID, right? Here it is saying like, yeah, customer name. It is saying like set customer name. That means setting the value. Readability is increased. Get customer name. Nothing but getting the value. Get to set is improving the readability for the variables point of view. This is how POJO classes are helping us, and these are the rules you have to follow always. Remember, you have to follow always these rules to define a POJO class. And you don't know, everywhere, every place POJO classes are being used. In most of the times, without POJO classes, there will not be frameworks. Framework implementation is not that much easy. That means if you are using any frameworks like Spring and modules like web module or JPA module or any other module you can take, directly or indirectly, frameworks are always operating on the POJO class objects only, POJO objects only. So that means even though you written a POJO class, internally frameworks will create an objects by using reflection API. So that much important POJOs are. And I already told you why POJO classes are very much popular here. It is there are a lot of design patterns available, guys. Generally, with respect to web application point of view, people will use that terminology. What is the terminology is? I told you, right? So data will be transmitted from one layer to another layer. For example, you know that controller in MVC architecture, we will have all these things, service layer, and then followed by repository layer, database layer, or DTO layer, or whatever it is, DAO layer, or whatever it is, right? So this will be called as DAO layer or whatever. So one layer to another layer, you are passing the data, and these are all coming. These objects you can consider as a POJO class objects. Now here people will use a terminology called as VO. That means value object, but directly, indirectly, most of the times POJO classes only. DTO is nothing but data transfer object. Like that, people will use different terminologies, but even though terminologies is different, little bit slight difference is there, but overall concept is POJO classes only. You got the point? So POJO classes are very much important, and we will use this POJO classes implementation in every framework, everywhere. Yeah, please remember the POJO class formats and follow the guidelines of the POJO class. In the next session, I will discuss one more common real-time tool called as Lombok. And what is Lombok framework, or what is Lombok jar file or library, how it is helping us. So we will see in the next session. I will cover that. By using Lombok, we can automate the process, or we can easily work with POJO classes, or some common utility coding we can avoid by using library Lombok. So there also we will see how to define POJO classes, or how POJO classes are being generated by using Lombok. We will see in the next session. So Lombok is also one of the most popular real-time library nowadays, being used in every application nowadays, in every organization. So thanks. Let's connect in the next session.